Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, I recently had someone bring the Doomed Petitioner to my attention, and with it the potential to talk about Kel'Garath again, and... Oh man, we need to slow our roll on this one. And also, Kel'Garath, if you're listening to this, just stop. Please. We're all begging you to just stop. Anyway, starting from the top, we should explain the basics of the theory as quickly as possible, which is that Kel'Garath might be rising to become the new controlling influence over the Taken and effectively become their next commander, or king, if you're going to use the most dramatic iteration of that. It'd be a compelling idea, and it is technically possible, but today I wanted to interlace story with opinion and just break down why I think that despite this being a weird and remote possibility, it's absolutely not going to happen. Touch wood, I hope. I pray. Maybe Bungie's going to make me eat humble pie and this is the plan, but for the moment, no, I don't believe that Kel'Garath is going to be the next commanding force over the Taken. I don't believe he is the successor to Taken King. We'll explain why in just a bit. But first, a word from our sponsors at Advanced GG. If you're looking for what I think is the best gaming supplement on the market, then look no further. They're the only FDA-approved gaming supplement, and the only gaming supplement shown to increase your focus and gaming performance by clinical studies. That's not the only reason you should get excited about Advanced GG, though. They've got a ton of great flavors, and because their formula uses a more natural green tea caffeine, it's a consistent 4 to 5 hour boost of energy with no sudden crash. We've even made a ton of cool merch with them, including desk mats, custom ice shakers, and even my own flavors of Advanced GG. Check out the latest and most stylishly packaged Pink Lemonade in particular. Go ahead and use my code down below in the description to get a discount on your purchase, or use code LawDaddy at checkout. Thanks again to Advanced GG for sponsoring this video. So to talk about this topic, I think it'd be best to break this video down into 4 parts. First of all, who is Kel'Garath? Second of all, where does the theory about him controlling the Taken come from? Thirdly, can a single powerful Taken even control the Taken generally? And last but not least, is this actually likely to happen in my opinion? So starting from the top, who is Kel'Garath? Well, Kel'Garath is a recurring Hive villain that has popped up in the Season of the Lost, Season of the Seraph, and Season of the Deep. There's lore potentially pertaining to him in this season too, which is where that wild theory comes in. His first appearance in the Season of the Lost saw him as a Knight of Xivu Arath, who was commanding the forces of the invading Hive in the Dreaming City. Their mission was to recapture Savathûn and bring her to justice, or as much a version of justice as the Hive believe in. And it was clear that, well, not only did Savathûn intend to betray the Hive, and therefore this mission was justified, but it was also a mission that Kel'Garath personally believed in. Previously, he was a dedicated knight to Savathûn's cause, and he had been so disgusted by her evident betrayal and her plan to get rid of her worm that he sought to absolve himself of whatever taint he had based on having previously been loyal to her. He would cleanse his armor by shearing it away against the serrated edges of the pits on Luna, and would emerge having rededicated himself to the Hive God of War, Xivu Arath. He was then honored by being allowed to lead critical missions within this campaign in the Dreaming City. We would face off against him in our first sortie into the Dreaming City, where we were originally pursuing the entity that we thought was Osiris, which of course was Savathûn in disguise, having basically puppeted Osiris. That was our first mission of Season of the Lost, but we also saw him again in the mission to recover Arga's scepter from one of the Queen's vaults in the Ascendant Plane. And we saw him in the final assault of the season, where Mara Sov and Saint 14 were actively defending Savathûn's crystalline prison before her worm could be properly extracted. In all 3 instances, Kel'Garath would be soundly defeated and would be sent back screaming into the Ascendant Plane. It's not known how he returned each time after death, but the simplest answer is probably that, well, he's a powerful enough Hive to have a throne world. It's worth remembering that throne worlds aren't restricted to just the 3 Hive gods. Whilst Xivu, Oryx, and Savathûn all undoubtedly have the most impressive throne worlds by far, I think it'd be fair to say that even the weaker individuals within the Hive have the potential to make their own throne worlds if they are powerful enough. After all, the very first one that we stepped into as Guardians was Crota's, and if you look at even more obscure and less impressive examples, both Toland and the Mindbender come to mind. They've been able to carve out portions of the Sea of Screams for themselves. Toland's is more of a spit of land, formless and a little bit vague, and the Mindbender's, well, it grew substantially in size thanks to the murder of Cayde 6, but they were both there. And so I don't think it's at all ridiculous to suggest that a high-ranking hive like Kel'Garath might have had one too. Either that or he's just been repeatedly cheating his own death because, video game? Either way, I digress. After the Season of the Loss, Xivu Arath actually met Kel'Garath, or communed with him, and passed judgment on him for the first time. Keep in mind at this moment that he is 0 for 3 against the Guardians and has failed in one of the most important missions that a hive has ever been entrusted to, literally bringing one of the gods to justice. Whilst Kel'Garath's failures in this regard were clear, all of those failures were also against Guardian elites, which gave Kel'Garath vital combat experience that most other hive simply lacked. With this in mind, and seeing his dedication, Xivu decided that instead of absconding Kel'Garath, to promote him to the rank of Darkblade, and even coring his own axe with a fragment of her own might, a shard of his blade that had been blessed and anointed by her. This would give him an even greater chance of success, and he was subsequently sent out to claim the Warmind of Mars as Xivu Arath was attempting to start her invasion of Earth ahead of the Witness's arrival. Now, that Grandmaster is pretty tough as far as battlegrounds go, especially with the whole mechanic where you gotta kite Kel'Garath around, but, well, I don't know about you guys, but I still have my Conqueror gilded all the way to Conqueror 11. So, yeah. Kel'Garath go bye-bye again. He was beaten by us and promptly got sent back with his tail between his legs. After this moment, Kel'Garath would find himself in dire straits, because, I mean, he's just been given all his power, having failed previously. This was his big moment to prove that he was indeed worthy, and, yeah, he failed once more. This is becoming a pattern, and maybe, I don't know, shame on Xivu for believing differently. There's a certain degree to which the tactic might have worked, but no. Kel'Garath is just a proven loser at this point. And ultimately, she would leave Kel'Garath to one of her war council, the hive wizard known as Rak'Thrain, to deal with. And this is where we see Kel'Garath getting picked up in terms of story next. This is from the Season of the Deep. These two powerful hive, Kel'Garath and the Hive Wizard, would meet within the domain of Xivu Arath's former High Celebrant, one of her most powerful agents. He was the one who we killed back in the Season of the Hunt, the one who had killed Osiris's ghost, Sagira. It's here that a conversation followed. Kel'Garath kneels before a feeble altar in an empty court, a dead knight's realm, a shriveled, fleshless rind, a cautionary tale. A wizard floats over the altar. The High Celebrant's domain was once a grand place of adoration. It holds a mighty tribute. The wizard Rak'Thrain, War Council, whispers Xivu Arath's bait to the knight. Kel'Garath remembers how Savathûn sought the sky and became its puppet, all so she could usurp sword logic. Favor wanes. It can be rekindled. You were disarmed, shamed, beaten so many times by a light wielder. Kel'Garath stands, spinning to face Rak'Thrain. He thrusts a claw forward at the wizard's throat, but she swoops back from his reach. Kel'Garath sneers. I need no blade. I am wielded. The plates upon my body are razors. Should you have remained with Savathûn and prayed to her to give you the light? Perhaps you would have found greatness then. You wither without her favor. I spit on the witch sister. I am an instrument of war. Not yet. Not truly. Rak'Thrain conjures a dark bolt of lightning that saps the room's dim lighting and casts it into the altar. The altar splits apart with a timbered snap, revealing An emerald sliver of a blade, bleeding shade and whispering rapture. A shard of the taken king's blade, conquered out of love, stolen away from Saturn's shadow. Kel'Garath fixates upon the blade shard. The wizard gestures to it with a lipless smile, and the knight steps forward. I will take it, to be an instrument of her will, to cleanse the hate of weakness with loving violence. Kel'Garath genuflects and encloses his claw around the emerald sliver, wisps of shadow spilling between the gaps in his claws. I offer myself to this union. The barrier of his flesh melts away. A will not his own enraptures him. Kel'Garath, risen from bones, taken by war. So, in that moment, Kel'Garath became a Taken and further submitted himself to Xivu-Arath's will. I think it's worth remembering that when someone is taken, it takes a whole lot of power for them to retain even a degree of their former selves. The lore describes the Taken as if they're hollow or husked out, and rightly so. Most typical Taken troops have only one purpose, which is to serve the will of the one who commands them. It takes extraordinary power on par with beings such as Mara Sov and Riven to be able to maintain a sense of self after having been taken. Most entities just are not capable of that. Now, the larger and greater commanders, on par with Kel'Garath, most certainly do retain a degree of control and command capability over other local Taken. But ultimately, that's not the same as true control. At this point, Kel'Garath was deployed into the depths of Titan to prevent us from accessing the egregore coral needed to commune with Asa, the proto-worm god. But in this process, he was defeated once more by Guardians. For those of you keeping count at home, that's 0 for 5. Not looking great there. Oh, and that's also after having been empowered by a fragment of Xivu-Arath's own power and then becoming a Taken, having clutched the Shard of Willbreaker, the Sword of Oryx, the Taken King. So, yeah, he has a lot of advantages for a Taken. Yeah, Kel'Garath is just not a winner at this point. He may be a very powerful hive by their standards, but the Guardians have been making mulch out of this guy since the mid-season of The Lost 3 years ago. So, nah, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't necessarily put my money on him being anywhere close to successful. So, that's who Kel'Garath is. What about question 2? Why does any of this weird theory apply to him? Well, it doesn't necessarily, but there's speculation abound within the lore tab of the Doomed Petitioner. Let's go ahead and catch up on that theory about Kel'Garath potentially becoming the new controller of the Taken by reading that lore tab real quickly. No more fear. You were a knight, devastator of Sol, ardent scholar of the bladed path. You are still taken. Nothing remains of you but the knife. You have been relinquished. The hand is severed. Wield yourself. What vows compel you? You have no vows. What drives you? You have no drive. You must take up the knife. You must take. So, yeah, that's rather ominous. I think there are things to go into and discuss here, but I think the first and most important thing to note here is that nowhere in this lore tab is Kel'Garath mentioned by name, and even when you look into the titles and the more specific bits and pieces around it, I don't think it necessarily ties this particular lore tab down to Kel'Garath alone either. Starting with those titles, Ardent Scholar of the Bladed Path and Devastator of Sol are not at all specific to Kel'Garath, and honestly, could apply to dozens, if not hundreds, of different Hive Knights throughout Sol who happen to have been taken. It could even just be a reference to the one Taken Knight boss that we encounter in the Coil this season. These titles are the only thing that gives us any hint as to who this is talking about on a more granular and specific level, and honestly, it's not specific at all. yeah, this could be Kel'Garath, but it's definitely not confirmable just from those. It could be anyone. Anyone who's a Hive Knight, at least. But if we're trying to analyze a little bit more about this passage, there are things we should look into, and the first is the perspective of the passage itself. In other words, who's actually saying all of this? Who's talking about this knight, this Taken? Well, that's what's really interesting, and that's where we need to make some comparisons. You see, this could all be an internal monologue, but I think it's not necessarily the case. Kel'Garath has often referred to himself as I, or has thought things to himself, I'm sure, but this syntax is oddly specific. In fact, I think it's a mirror of something much, much older. Back in the time of the Taken King, we didn't have lore tabs, but we did have grimoire cards. And you know, this lore tab reminds me of them. In particular, it reminds me of the grimoire cards that were written for every single one of the Taken troops. Have you ever read one of those? Well, if you haven't, let's read one of them. This is the one for the Taken Thrall, and keep in mind, it could be any of them. They're all relatively similar in terms of structure. I want you to go ahead and remember the Kel'Garath reading, or the Doomed Petitioner reading rather, and then look at the syntax, compare how it flows similar to this one. It's almost like it copies its structure. You are a thrall, numberless spawn of the Hive, shrieking and expendable, one pebble in an avalanche. You have been taken. Stop howling. Set down your claws. Your fear is over. Your weakness is done. You will be strong now. What is your purpose? What law drives you? To close with the enemy, to rend it, to move in great numbers, to cower when alone, to swarm when together. But you are predictable, frail. You cannot pass through fire and shot. You need to be elusive. There is a knife for you. It is shaped like sideways. Take up the knife. Use it. Take your new shape. And if you've been paying attention to this, and even just opening it up on Ishtar Collective and comparing those two different lore entries, you'll notice the similarities. Take a look at the bit at the end where it says, take up the knife. In Doomed Petitioner, it says, you must take up the knife. It's almost identical. And then when you sit there and take a look at, there is a knife for you, it is shaped like sideways. The sideways is in square brackets. Equally, when you take a look at Doomed Petitioner, within that lore tab, you'll see something else in square brackets where it talks about, what is your vow? You have no vow. And if you really wanted to bring it all the way back to the beginning, at the very start, the syntax of both the lore tab and the grimoire card are very similar. Where the grimoire card's second sentence resoundingly says, you have been taken, the Doomed Petitioner lore tab says, you are still taken. It feels really similar in terms of the structure and syntax, and so it makes me wonder if this is from the perspective of the same person. The thing we can draw is that, well, maybe that is the case, but if it is so, the implications of that are resoundingly terrifying. Back in the day, we always presumed that the voice in these grimoire cards was Oryx, and that this was his perspective, given that at the time being, he was the only real leader of the darkness that we knew about, the only major leader at least. Now, we see this syntax being presented to us again in a brand new lore entry. But Oryx is very much dead at this point. The Witness is mostly out of the picture and is unable to have direct and substantial control of the Taken. Xivu Arath's control has also been significantly decreased at this point. In fact, the lore tab for Doomed Petitioner seems to make note of that, saying that you have been relinquished, the hand is severed. That means one of two things which are being displayed in this lore tab. Either this is evidence of a Taken without direction, and the entire lore tab is perhaps from Kel'Garath's own perspective. It's just a note on the fact that Kel'Garath has no true purpose or drive, but to continue as a warrior, and, you know, is just sitting there being one of those Taken that doesn't really have any major commander. I've noted this power gap and this power vacuum before, and it's not the first time we've encountered it. However, there is a deeper possibility, and that's that this represents another perspective of another force that is somehow grasping to give direction to the Taken, A force that, if this syntax has been used before, might have been there all along. But again, this isn't Oryx, this isn't Xivu, and this isn't even the Witness necessarily. The line, of course, hints to this, is, "You must take up the knife. You must take. If this new influencing voice is there, then who knows why it's asking Kel'Garath, or whoever this knight may be, to take up influence with the Taken, if that is the interpretation of it we want to draw. It's something that is beyond the Witness. That should be a cause for some concern, I believe. I think it's possible that there's a terrible dark new Taken commander out there, or maybe it's something long lost that's always been around. I know people will shout and scream that, it could be the Winnower. That's mostly unproven, but I don't discount that theory. It does lead us to our third question though, which is simply that if this voice is demanding that Kel'Garath take up the knife and control the other Taken, well, is that even possible? Can a Taken control the other Taken en masse? And the answer to that is, yes and no. It's complicated. Let's start with no. The reason I say no is because there is a difference between controlling the Taken as a whole and directing the Taken locally. A figure like Oryx, Savathûn, Xivu Arath, or the Witness might be able to direct whole armies, but a local Taken commander of significant size or strength will lack the will, independence, and vision to actually direct the Taken en masse. The Taken are subsumed by the will of whoever their controller is and will unflinchingly serve it. In doing so, they have purpose, but a Taken itself doesn't have purpose without that. So, yeah, unlike in those instances where they're commanded by Oryx or Savathûn or Xivu Arath or the Witness, they will be unable to mostly form any kind of organization. And that being said, there is an answer to this that states yes, and that's on two levels. We've seen examples in the absence of a true leader where the Taken will become a little bit more like wild, vicious animals. However, if there is a strong local Taken that is capable of commanding, it is able to more effectively impose its will and organize local forces in terms of strategy and objectives. The examples that we see in this season are predominantly around the Taken Knight that is encountered as one of the final bosses of the Coil. That is most certainly not the best example, but I think it is the most relevant and recent one. It's an example where the Taken don't truly have the best goal, they kind of just fester, but they are significantly more organized and significantly better in combat when there is a local commander. So with that in mind, the question evolves a little. Can a single of these greater Taken have vision and then control the Taken as a whole or in part? Given that they are able to exert some influence, well, to that I think the answer is also clearly yes. And I think the reason for that is because we have two prime examples of when that's happened. Riven and Moloch. Riven is a unique case, given that her control, independence, and power over the Taken was partly built from the wish magic she used as she was taken by Oryx. Moloch, on the other hand, well, he's worth looking into. You see, you may not have heard of the name Moloch, but Destiny 1 veterans certainly will have. You see, in the time of the Taken King era's April update, in the time after the Taken King's death, there was a small resurgence of Taken activity on the Dreadnought. That was thanks to a force of rising Taken, and one in particular who had the potential to become their new leader. That leader was a Hive Knight known as Moloch. Moloch was remarkable for a bunch of reasons. He was formerly the son of Savathûn for one, which would have ranked him amongst some of the most powerful Ascendant Hive in existence. He was also planted in the court of Oryx so that he might potentially funnel back information and enact the plans of Savathûn. And seeing all of this unfold, Oryx decided to respond in mockery of his sister by taking Moloch. This is why we can say that in most instances, the individual Taken, the day-to-day commanders even the stronger ones, can't command the whole swarm of Taken. But if a Taken individual was powerful enough in life, like Moloch, they don't necessarily lack the vision and power needed to lead. even after they've been husked out and sharpened by darkness and become a Taken. So then this leads us to that major question. We've got our perfect one-to-one case study, and we know that Moloch, a powerful Taken in his own right, was able to have the vision to take over where Oryx left off, and to gain command of the entire swarm. That takes significant willpower, which is possible for a Taken to have. So that leads us all back to our final question: why couldn't this be the case for Kel'Garath? Is this likely? And I still have to say that for Kel'Garath specifically, based on what we've seen in the story, I do not think that he is likely to control the Taken as a whole without some incredibly assisting circumstances. And why is that? It's because he's a massive loser! Okay, but seriously, Hive leaders, Ascendant Hive of truly great stature, the type that Moloch represents, they lead, they don't follow. Everything that is written in the lore about Kel'Garath, much as he may be a powerful knight, has always put him in the context of being a follower, not a leader. The one time he's shown even a little bit of independence was when he decided to leave Savathûn's charge for Xivu Arath's. And at that point in time, he's not making an independent decision, he's going from one master to another. He's always displayed fealty and loyalty. He seemingly has very little capacity for personal ambition. Meanwhile, we saw Moloch actually enacting a bid to potentially take control of the Taken in Oryx's absence, so much so that when we attempted to capture him on the Dreadnought, he fled to the Hellmouth on Luna and started to fortify it with Taken Blight. Kel'Garath in Hive terms, and I know I sound like I'm saying this for the meme, but really, he is just some dude who really showed his loyalty to Xivu Arath in the wake of Savathûn's clear betrayal and happened to get promoted by failing upwards. Moloch, on the other hand, was an authority unto himself based on his actions alone, and was the son of Savathûn. If the Osmium dynasty of the Hive had a line of succession, Moloch was literally on that line. He was in line to take the throne at some point, just like Crota or Nokris or Hashladun. So is it possible that Kel'Garath might rise and become a threat once more? Absolutely. In fact, he's such a recurring meme at this point that I think it's almost guaranteed. Look out for him in Heresy. But is he going to rise to become the leader of the Taken? I mean, I really don't think so. I've been wrong about this stuff before and been forced to eat a massive portion of humble pie when I am wrong, so I'll not rule anything out. That being said, purely as an examination of Kel'Garath's character, I think he lacks the key characteristics of someone who would be able to lead the Taken in battle. He lacks power and vision. There is, however, one thing we should remember about him, which is that over his time he has changed, and he has got more dangerous. Caught within the heart of the Darkblade's axe that he got when he was promoted first, Kel'Garath's own blade remains, a weapon that was anointed by Xivu Arath. When he voluntarily became Taken, he did so by grasping a shard of Willbreaker, the sword of the Taken King Oryx, and we still don't know where that shard is. It might still be with him. If he has acquired artifacts of power like this from two of the three major Hive gods, then that does put him in a position of significant power beyond most Taken. If everything else is taken into account, Kel'Garath is still a bit of a joke, but, I mean, he certainly is a little bit more menacing than your average Taken commander. I don't see much of a future for Kel'Garath, but maybe the narrative team does. If they do, I hope that they use those opportunities to expand Kel'Garath and develop him as a villain. I also hope that he becomes more of a leader if he is going to take up the mantle of the Taken King. The aftermath of Xivu's banishment from her own throne world might be just the moment to see this development take place. If that is Kel'Garath in the Doomed Petitioner lore tab, it might be the first moment at which he starts to gain a little bit of independence, and maybe gets the inkling of an idea that, well, he is powerful, and Xivu Arath has failed him just like Savathûn did. And who knows, the only Hive god that Kel'Garath hasn't taken some powerful artifact from is Savathûn. But to him, I mean, that's wielding the light in some regard. That would be clear apostasy. Heresy, even. And, well, look at that. Is the name of a future episode landing after Final Shape. Who knows what'll happen next. Keep your eyes on Kel'Garath. I don't think we're done with this loser quite yet, but I also don't think this loser is going to become a lord anytime soon. That being said, if you enjoyed the video, do what you need to do to feed the algorithm. Please, it really helps. Go ahead, hit subscribe, like the video, and leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section. Do you buy the idea that it's Kel'Garath there in the Doomed Petitioner lore tab? I know I've given a 30-minute spiel about how I really don't think it is, but if you disagree, go ahead and let me know. I do not believe there's enough substantial evidence, but it's entirely possible that I've missed something. That being said, know that as per usual, your viewership as always is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Por audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.